Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 10th of January of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. Of course, first we're going to start with Soledar. Today we received a lot of updates from this area. Today the Russians continue the pressure in this area, they take more territories, and some sources are saying that the forces in Soledar appeared in a small, local, but cauldron. But before we start with Soledar, first let's take a look at the map of Institute of Study of War. As you can see, this yellow cloud shows that this is the progress according to the Russian sources, and this small town, area that located inside in this back, this is Soledar. So as you can see, according to this map, the situation for the Ukrainians is critical in this area, and maybe there is a cauldron. So let's try to understand, try to find out if there is a cauldron or there are no cauldron at all. First of all, let's take a look at the Russian sources map, and as you can see, there are a lot of icons in this area, from the south, from the west, from the north, from the east, from every single side, and let's try to discuss them one by one. And first of all, let's take a look at the area between Krasnogora, Paraskovyevka, Podgorodnaya, and Soledar itself. As you can see, the Russian source map has been updated. Now the Russians shows the real and full control over Podgorodnaya. Furthermore, they're showing like a soldier on the Russian flag and the arrow in direction of Paraskovyevka. Furthermore, a little bit to the north, there is another arrow and the icon showing about the progress movements in direction of Krasnogora, and another important icon above this cross in this area, and there is like an area in the video, a photo of the Ukrainians in the salt cave number 7. Now let's discuss about the updates we have, and let's try to update the Western sources map, trying to understand the real area of heavy clashes, of control of the Russians, and so on. First of all, during the day we received at Podgorodnaya, not just today, but yesterday, the day before yesterday, we received the first update that the Russians established control over Podgorodnaya. Furthermore, during the previous days, we received update that the Russians managed to cross this area and take control over some checkpoints in the town by the name of Paraskovyevka. But we haven't received any updates that they managed to cross the railroad rocket in this area, but some sources are saying that the Russians crossed the river, crossed this railroad rocket, they entered, let's say, the west part of this area, the Ukrainian side, and from this bridgehead, the Russians started deployment and movement in direction of Blagodatnaya in this area. The area in Blagodatnaya, above Blagodatnaya, is in the fog of war, so it's very difficult to understand what exactly happens there. But anyway, the Russians controls the area near Krasnogora. The Russians, I believe, have established control over the railroad rocket, at least on this side, maybe just fire control, physical control. And now we find ourselves in Soledar. The situation in Soledar is very critical. There are very heavy clashes. There is a very big mass. There is a very big salad of forces in this area. But anyway, we have a lot of updates. And yesterday, the Russians entered the central part of Soledar, and there was heavy clashes inside the town council. Furthermore, it's the central part of Soledar. Furthermore, there was an update about establishing control over this corner building on the north of Soledar, over these garages, and then we have updates that the Russians got as close as possible to the railroad station by the name of Sol. Furthermore, the Russians got right in front of town by the name of Krasnopopovka, this one, and there were no updates about Razdolovka. Yes, they tried to develop during the previous days in their offensive operation in that direction, but without any progress. So now we can go back to the red territory, the red cloud, and let's connect the icons, trying to understand the real picture in Soledar. As you can see, according to this map, Soledar is in cauldron. It's encircled, and it's not just operational encirclement, it's tactical encirclement. Now there are no safe road to evacuate Ukrainians from Soledar. There are no safe road to move equipment. Maybe the only possible solution is to run away without armed vehicles, trying to hide among the buildings or something like this, because if the Russians see some kind of tank or armored vehicles, of course they start attacking this area immediately. According to the Russian report, hours during the day, I understood that the Russians want to encircle Ukrainian forces in Soledar. And we can understand because they want to ruin the spirit of Ukrainians in this area. They want to encircle them, they want to make a lot of videos of Ukrainian forces who says that they were dropped by their commanders and so on, and something like this. Now, about this blue cloud. This blue cloud doesn't mean that the Russians control the entire area. This blue cloud shows the area of the territory that is under Russian control, the territory where the Russians doing or finishing clearing operation, the area where the Russians at this moment try to storm or do some offensive operation. So let's call it like gray zone. So this blue cloud is a mix of all these territories, because when talking about, let's say, Krasnopopovka and the railroad station Sol, this part of blue cloud doesn't mean that the Russians are somewhere here right in front of this area, right in front of this railroad. That means that the Russians might be somewhere here on this line, but using, let's say, tanks and artillery, armored vehicles, they are able to pin down the Ukrainians in this area and to attack and to cut the supply road. So it means something like this. The same situation in Blagodatna. It doesn't mean that the Russians are somewhere in this cross. Maybe they're a little bit to the south or to the east, but anyway, from now on, they are able to establish real physical control, fire control. Furthermore, the losses of Ukrainians, if they decide to use this cross or this road, will be very high, up to 90 or maybe 100%. When talking about the Ukrainians, now these days, these hours, they're doing just one thing. They try to evacuate forces. They try to evacuate ammo and shell in this area, because as we know, the Ukrainians were trying to prepare Soledar for a very long siege, and they moved a lot of ammo, a lot of shells, and we know that Ukrainians have a lack of these things, so that's why they want to save as much as possible for further battles, for further offensive or counter-offensive or defense operations. So when talking about Soledar, the Ukrainians first of all try to establish their position, their fortification in the salt mine number 7, then the salt mine number 4, salt mine number 1 and 3. Of course, the Ukrainians try to establish their defense position in the hospital that located on the west part of Soledar, and of course one of the most important, one of the most powerful is fortification on the railroad station by the name of Sol. And as you can see, all these roads is under fire control, we understand, but this is the only possible way to protect, to secure this small road that connects the central part of Soledar with the railroad station Sol. The Ukrainians use this road very carefully. They understand that this road is always under Russian fire, and it's very difficult to use this road. You need to catch the time when you can use this before the Russians reloads, or during the Ukrainian counter battery duels with the Russians or something like this. Because when talking about the Russian sources map, today we received a lot of updates from Seversk, and as you can see, Seversk is located somewhere, let's say around 14 kilometers or less, 20-30 kilometers from Soledar, and as I understand, the Ukrainian uses Seversk artillery garrison to suppress and to attack the Russians while attacking. And today the Russians during the day in their report reported that the Ukrainians in Seversk lost one M777 artillery system, up to two Krab artillery system, it's howitzers, something around one Uragan. And when talking about Artyomovsk, the Ukrainians lost one Grad system. In Konstantinovka they lost another Grad system. So as you can see, the Ukrainians tries to help their army in Soledar to penetrate, to break through, to get out of there. They're using all the rest of the last maybe artillery systems, and the Russians understand that the Ukrainians need to risk. That's why they're doing a lot of mistake, and the Russians do very effective and accurate counter artillery duels. And as a result of these duels, you see that the Ukraine lost a lot of artillery systems. When talking about the Ukrainians headquarters, today we receive update that the Ukrainians took a decision to step back very far to the west north from Bakhmut, and now their main forces, they try to deploy their forces here, and they try to establish local defense line in this area, trying to not allow the Russians, if they are able to penetrate and take control Soledar very fast, they try to prepare something like a very fast defense line, just with one purpose: not to allow the Russians to develop their offensive operation and to develop their bridgehead in direction of Slaviansk and Kramatorsk, because we understand that if the Russians takes control over Soledar, they may continue all these things, all these attacks on the shoulders of the Ukrainians, and they are able to collapse entire north front line very soon and very fast without any problems. Also, don't forget about a very powerful garrison that located on Seversk bridgehead. This is very important front line. The Ukrainians collect a lot of artillery systems. They were planning to attack and storm Kremenaya, so that's why there are a lot of forces. And if Soledar falls, and if the Russians are able to develop their bridgehead, they are able to encircle Seversk, or at least they will be able to force the Ukrainian forces in Seversk to leave this area and to drop a lot of weapon, a lot of artillery system, just to leave them there with one purpose: to save their lives. So the situation on Soledar front line is very critical. When talking about Bakhmut, as you can see, there are a lot of icons as well, and during the day the Russians destroyed 2 radar systems in this area, one in Artyomovsk, another one in Dzержinsk or Toretsk. Furthermore, today the Russians activated, or during the previous 24 hours, the Russians activated their actions, offensive operation in the area of Clishchiivka. When talking about Clishchiivka, the Russians are saying that, as you can see, the Western source map has been a little bit updated, but the real progress of the Russians in Clishchiivka is something like this. So they control the central part, and now they're storming the fortifications that located on the northwest and the west side of Clishchiivka. The Ukrainians took a decision to deploy their strategic reserves in Bakhmut with one purpose: just to slow down the Russians and to stop them. And the main reason why the Ukrainians are doing this is the 20th of January. As you know, the Western countries are planning to make some kind of meeting on the 20th of January where they will try to analyze, discuss the winters, the spring, the autumn, the summer campaigns, and they will decide what kind of weapon they need to give the Ukrainians. And when talking about the previous meetings that took place in September, in August, we remember that at that period of time the Ukrainians were pretty successful in Kharkiv, in Kherson. They took a lot of territory, so that's why the Western countries were very happy to give new weapon. But now this meeting on the 20th of January is going to be under the flag of the failure on the front line. So of course it's not very good, and this is the reason why the Ukrainians want to hold Bakhmut and Soledar as long as possible. At least they want to do this at least by the 20th of January, before this meeting. And after this meeting, as soon as the Ukrainians and the Western countries signs every necessary papers, contracts and documents, of course the Ukrainians will be, at least they will have possibilities to step back, and they will be able to leave Bakhmut, Atol and Soledar, and maybe even Seversk, who knows. The most important is to get armored vehicles and tanks and artillery systems. When talking about Toretsk, the Russians made some kind of record in combat in this area. They managed to capture a few soldiers, just regular clashes on the front line. When talking about Donetsk front line, the Russians continued their effective artillery duels. They were attacking Avdiivka, and as a result of those clashes, the Ukraine lost another M77 artillery system. The Ukrainian lost some few crab systems, it's howitzers, and so as you can see, the Russians continue effective artillery duels. And when talking about the losses on the ground, when talking about, let's say, Zaporozhye, South Donetsk area, the Ukraine lost just 20 soldiers, something around 3 armored vehicles. There were no activation near Soledar. Nobody started anything, just irregular artillery duels without any movements from both sides. When talking about Donetsk front line, the Ukraine lost around 50 soldiers and something around 7 armored vehicles. And when talking about Liman and Kupinsk front line, the Ukrainians lost around 60 soldiers and 9 armored vehicles for the entire front line. So as you can see, there are no movements. The Russians continue their effective artillery duels on the Kupinsk-Liman front line as well. The Ukrainian lost at least 2 D-20 howitzers, and furthermore, the Ukrainian lost another crab system in this area as well. And very interesting update they will receive from the Russians as well. A lot of sources confirmed that the Russians are planning to build a new town, new city in the area of Donbas occupation, let's say. And they're planning to fill this town with a population over 1 million people. And this is a very interesting question. It's a very interesting situation, because we understand that the Russians, it's impossible like in a year to get 1 million people from nowhere, right? So when talking about this area, the Russians during this special operation established control over Mariupol and many other towns, but we remember that almost every single town that the Russians stormed were ruined, destroyed, reduced to ruins because of very heavy clashes. I'm talking about Mariupol. I believe that Mariupol, the Russians managed to save as much as possible from Mariupol. When talking about Rubizhnoye, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, these towns is destroyed, almost reduced to ruins. When talking about Popasna, there are no even a single building. When talking about Seversk, Bakhmut, these towns will be erased from the earth map. So, and the Russians are planning to build new towns, so that means that the Russians are planning to continue their tactic. They are not planning to continue this special operation as they used to at the first months, when they were trying to be very they're trying to encircle towns without dealing a lot of damage to the buildings, where they're trying to save towns and so on. So 1 million towns, that means that 1 million towns, a town is enough to have population of Slaviansk, Kramatorsk, Toretsk, of all these towns. So that means that the Russians will continue their tactic. The tactic of very powerful, massive artillery attacks all over the front line, or at some certain front line. And the main goal is to force the Ukrainians to step back, or to hold the territories where they have a lot of losses. And this tactic is very effective, at least at this stage of special operation. So I believe that the Russians will continue doing the same thing, and they will try to move further to Slaviansk, Kramatorsk. Some words about Seversk. Seversk is in the very big danger, and we understand this because if you take a look at Soledar, if the Russians are able to take control over this bridgehead, we understand that there are no more towns, no more barriers that can protect Seversk from attacks in direction from the flanks. And there are a very big army there, and some sources are saying that this is the next target of the Russians. And when talking about Seversk, the Russians will try to storm and take control over this town, not just with the Wagners. Of course, I believe that there will be no Wagners in this area at all. The Russians will try to use their regular army, and maybe they will try to encircle Seversk as well. So we'll see. Anyway, we'll see. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you can condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon. Have a good day. Bye bye.